If you were a gamer in the late 80s and early 90s, you remember the console wars between the two biggest names in video game entertainment, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis. Even if you are biased out of nostalgia, or because you have a system in your house right now, there was one product and one company that was superior to the other. Now, was it the home of the greedy ring-hunting hedgehog, or the Italian plumber whose princess was always in another castle? Nintendo gets points for longevity as the older company. They were created in 1889 and started with manufacturing a traditional playing card game called Hanafuda in Kyoto, Japan. Sega came along in 1940, started by two Americans, and is now headquartered in Tokyo, Japan. Their first release was a coin-operated video game called Periscope, which was made in 1966. In the early 70s, Nintendo was known for creating electronic versions of classical board games like chess and mahjong, but it was in the 80s that what would eventually be called the Great Console War would begin. Nintendo, which would release a product in 1983 called Famicom, short for Family Computer, would earn enough money and gather enough popularity for the Japanese company to keep working on the system long enough for them to create the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985. Their 8-bit video game titles like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid would help it become one of the best-selling consoles of all time. Sega would create their own system to rival Nintendo's with the SG-1000, released on the same day as the Famicom in 1983, but to much less success. Sega needed to upgrade their software to compete and went on to manufacture the Sega Master System in 1985 with games like Alex Kidd in Miracle World, Hang On, and Safari Hunt. Nintendo was crushing its competition with the NES, and Sega had to do something. The battle for supremacy of the consoles was solely in Nintendo's grasp until 1988. The Sega Genesis, called the Mega Drive, made its debut and would become the hottest gaming system with 16-bit graphics with titles like Golden Axe, Altered Beast, and Ghouls and Ghosts. It wasn't until a few years later when Nintendo launched the Super Nintendo Entertainment System that they would return with a vengeance. Sega struggled to contain Nintendo's return to power with Super Mario World, F-Zero, and a major victory with a company called Capcom to solely release one of the greatest fighting games of all time, Street Fighter II. Sega wouldn't surge against the Nintendo until a little blue hedgehog called Sonic appeared in 1991, which would drive sales up and allow them to stay in business for a while longer. But once again, the Super Nintendo would outsell its competitor and attain global superiority in sales. Right Up Player 3 entered the game. Sony PlayStation was released in 1994 in Japan and worldwide the year after, selling 100 million units. The sequel, PlayStation 2, is the best-selling console to date, selling 155 million units between the year 2000 right up until 2012. Sega's Dreamcast was the last console they made in 1998 and was discontinued in 2001. As of writing this, the console wars continue with Sony coming in at number 1 on the list of the most profitable video game companies with $25 billion in the year 2021. With the release of the PlayStation 5. Nintendo is listed at number 3, with Animal Crossing being its biggest seller and $12.1 billion last year. And Sega is still holding on as a company, now called Sega Sammy, with its most profitable game release called Total War Saga Troy, bringing in $2.3 billion in gaming revenue during 2021.